Started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 23 of Circle of Fellows. This is the monthly broadcast featuring a selection of IABC fellows talking about an issue of interest to communicators. In fact, usually that topic is aligned with the editorial theme of the month for IABC, the International Association of Business Communicators. Did I say who I was? I'm Shel Holtz. I'm the moderator of the panel and host of the For Immediate Release podcast network, on which the recording and podcast of this conversation resides. Glad you're able to join us today. Want to let everybody know that you can ask questions during the course of the panel by sending a tweet using the hashtag COF23. That's for Circle of Fellows, COF23. I have the stream up on my screen, and I'll be able to pass your questions along to the panel. We're supposed to have a panel of 4 today. So far, there are 2. Jim Schaefer and Jim Lukaszewski are both encountering some technical difficulties getting onto the Google Hangout. Mark Schumann and John Gerstner are with us, and I'll have them introduce themselves in just a minute. Want to address an issue before we get started. IABC has notified me, and I have had a couple of messages myself, noting that the panel today was all male. And yeah, we were acutely aware of that. Over the course of these Circle of Fellows podcasts, we have had our female members of the Fellows group well represented. In fact, last month there were 3. Next month, when we will talk about fostering a socially responsible organization, there will be 3: Priya Bates, Mary Hills, and Cindy Schmieg. George McGrath will be the lone male panelist next month. Anna Willey assembles the panels, and essentially it comes down to 2 things: people who want to talk about the topic of the month, but even more important, availability at noon Eastern on the 3rd Thursday of the month. So there is always an effort to have a good gender mix on the panel, but this month it just worked out that the panelists who were available and interested in talking about this, where those things converged, happen to be all male members of the Fellows group. However, Anna solicited the female members of the group for their input, and I will be sharing these over the course of the hour for feedback from John and Mark, and with luck, Jim and Jim, if they're able to join us. But with that, let's get started. And John, why don't you introduce yourself, and then Mark.
Well, thanks, Shel, and hi, everyone. I'm John Gerstner, CEO of my own consulting and training company, Communitelligence. I feel like I've been an IABC member and business communication professional since birth, or nearly so, which I guess makes me a trusted strategic advisor in training. Previously, in my career, I managed diverse communication assignments for John Deere. These included launching and managing John Deere's internal communications program and intranet. I served as the company's first manager of environmental communications and authored a coffee table corporate history book for the company. More recently, I've worked with Florida Blue in corporate communications and have been writing and speaking on those topics. And since then, in my spare time, I like to travel, practice art photography, and play tennis.
And be a grandfather.
And be a grandfather, and all that goes with that.
And Mark, who is in a hotel on hotel Wi-Fi, so we're keeping our fingers crossed for your connection, Mark.
We will, and it's a hotel under construction, so it might be even more interesting. Hey, everybody, I'm Mark Schumann. I am from the Metro New York area and have spent my career hoping to be a trusting and trusted advisor for leaders in business, helping them become better communicators. I spent most of my career with Towers Perrin, where I led the communication practice. And in recent years have done a bit of a right turn when it comes to my profession, and have focused on executive coaching, and just completed the certification program for executive coaches at Columbia University. So I got to go back to school at a very senior age. I also work at Baruch College, which is part of the City University of New York, as the Director of Communication Studies, where I teach and form the curriculum for communication for MBA students. So today's topic is one very close to my professional heart.
Outstanding. And let's start with a pretty basic discussion topic. One of the phrases that gets bandied about an awful lot in communication circles is getting a seat at the table. This is often, oh, Jim has been able to join us. Hey, Jim Lukashevsky, how are you? Jim, can you hear me? Not yet. Well, let's continue with that that observation that everybody.
I'm here, but no sound.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to chat with Jim over in the chat over on the right of the screen, so we can continue with the conversation.
We are here.
And do you need a seat at the table? One of the things that has always driven me crazy about the seat at the table idea is that in most communication departments, there's only one person who's going to have that seat at the table. It's going to be the chief communication officer or the vice president of corporate communications. Can you be an advisor without having the seat at the table?
Well, Shell, I haven't spent most of my life worrying about the table or the chairs, but I do ask myself the question, do I have the ear of the leader? And does the leader I'm trying to counsel listen to what I have to say? And most important, does the leader internalize what I might suggest, and most importantly, what I might ask, to use those thoughts to help discover for himself or herself a commitment to communication, and certainly the skills to effectively communicate. So I don't worry about the table, but I do worry about having the ear.
And John, any thoughts?
Yes, I would agree that it's a misnomer to think that there is some table somewhere, although there are board tables, of course, in large corporations, but you take your table with you everywhere you go, and advise as best you can wherever you go with whomever you interact with. And I think that works at all levels, whether your boss is a supervisor, a manager, a director, or the CEO. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah,
Shell, can you hear me?
I can, Jim.
Hey, okay. I wrote a chapter in a book about this called "Really the Table's a Myth." I work with senior people all the time, as you guys do it, and they ask me, because they know I talk about this, where's this table that all my staff keep asking about? They want to be a part of. Is it near my office? Do I have to go there if I find out where it is? Who's going to be there except the same whiny staff I always see? It's a myth. The issue is when you watch a meeting of any kind, what you watch for is when the meeting is over and the boss touches Mary's shoulder and say, "Mary, can you hang back for a second? Tom, can you just come and see me for just a minute?" That's where the table is. It's John. You are the table. You have to believe that. So wherever you are, whenever you're there, you are the table. Doesn't matter who else is in the room. It never does. It has to be up to you. And this is the mentality that we don't really have. We tend to look at ourselves as communicators only, and it sort of begins with that mentality, and this in a way prevents you from getting to the table because every boss I've ever worked for considers themselves a great communicator. I mean, have you guys ever worked for somebody who thought they were not a good communicator?
Well, it's always been one of the challenges, isn't it? I mean, even in projecting ourselves as professionals is because, oh, well, you're a communicator. Everybody communicates. Yeah, I can communicate.
Right. I mean, it's not about that. It's really about your relationship with the person that is the leader or the operator or whatever who's in the room. The most important meetings always happen after the big meetings anyway. The only reason they have big meetings is because the boss is tired of talking to us individually, puts us all in a room for an hour, listens to us, and then dismisses us, and then goes to the people he trusts or she trusts and makes a decision. Or maybe they made the decision before the meeting. I like to position and teach the folks I work with in council. You want to be the first person the boss talks to, and you want to be the last person the boss talks to before something important happens.
Yeah, and I give the same counsel, Jim, and it's very much suggesting to people that even as they map out their careers, rather than saying, I want this job or this job, I always say, what conversations do you want to be a part of, and to call you early in the morning or late at night for your thoughts on something. To me, that's far more relevant than which seat.
Well, I think, my philosophy is this. Every problem, question, situation, problem management faces is first and foremost a management problem, question, or issue. And the problem with most staff people, especially communicators, is we start right off with communication solutions. And we're automatically talking a language, first of all, that the boss is competing with us because they feel they're great communicators. So they're arguing with us in their brains and not talking. Secondly, we're in a different place. They don't think communication is important until it really is. If you want to get in with the boss, you're going to have to talk like a boss and understand something about what he's or she's interested in from the beginning. If communication's all you got nothing. You really don't. You have to start somewhere else.
I would certainly echo that. I think honing your writing, editing, photography, and video skills won't get you where you need to be in terms of becoming a strategic, trusted advisor. And I always counsel mentees and others that I'm speaking to that you really have to understand the business and think of yourself as a business professional, not solely a communication professional. And so
I make it even easier. I lost you. I make it even easier because I only ask you to specialize in one part of the business. I don't know if you can hear me or not. I suddenly have something else on my screen.
I can hear you just fine, Jim.
Okay. Anyway, it's impossible for us to know the business because 90% of us can't add, subtract, multiply, or divide reliably, which is why we're in public relations. So, and everyone we work for can. So find something you really intrigues you, hopefully intrigues the boss, and learn a lot about that. So you have some point of commonality that is beyond communication. You're going to get to communication, no question about it. They're probably going to get. I don't know how to get rid of this. It's the Google Chrome ad remover ad. I'm going to hit this and see if it goes away.
We lost him.
That did exactly the opposite of what he wanted it to do. Let me push back just a little on the seat at the table thing. I had just started in a job. I was manager of employee communication, and I was told that the leadership had already made a decision to implement a shareholder value enhancement philosophy in the organization. This is what brought down WorldCom and Enron, were SVE initiatives, where every decision is made based on the idea that you have to increase shareholder value or you're not going to follow that decision. I tried to tell them that there's no good way to communicate this. There's no way that you can get employees excited to jump out of bed every morning, just really passionate and energized to go into work and enhance shareholder value. The decision had already been made, and I called my predecessor and I said, were you able to tell them as they were making this decision that this is something that's going to be very hard to do? And she said, no, we're hired guns here. We're brought in after the decisions are made and told to clean up the town, essentially, solve this problem, communicate this thing. And if there had been somebody in those decision-making meetings to say, look, I understand what you're getting to. There's probably another way that we can achieve those results without implementing this particular philosophy, we might never have gone down that road.
I mean, this is the point of being a trusted advisor, and that is you don't do this in meetings. You're going to do it directly with the most important person in the play, and you're going to do it directly with them. You've got to have that kind of access. When you mentioned I think John mentioned earlier, or when I pick up the phone and call, I mean, they have to take the call. So, they have to be in a position to trust you enough or to rely on you enough. And this takes time. I think what I also advocate that whenever you talk to these people, you don't just whine and cry. You make 3 suggestions about what they could do, incremental suggestions. A few of us are equipped to give a silver bullet, especially the topic, Shell, you just mentioned, shareholder value. There isn't one, I don't think, unless it's a big new number, but that's positive. But we can make incremental suggestions for moving the needle a bit, and if you get in the habit of making this structure of making 3 simple suggestions every time you talk, especially to the people who matter, they're going to call you sooner. They just are, because everybody else is doing what they do every day, like communicators. We got a communication solution, which they're not going to buy. It's a different mindset altogether. It involves what I talked about earlier, plus recognizing that most of the time, most of us don't even study leaders. We don't, we study, something in that we see in our email, but who's actually studying, doing what bosses do when they have problems? They don't look for a media solution somewhere else. They look up bosses they trust and admire and respect to see what they've done to solve their problems. How many of us actually study leadership? How many of us actually read Harvard Business Review, for example, when it comes out? This is still the global Bible in business today. Anyway, I'm talking too much, but it's a different mental set altogether.
And I think it's also not only those suggestions we can make, but it's the questions that we ask. And it's what those questions can lead to for a leader to discover for himself or herself why communication matters, or why the reaction of those key stakeholders matter. And so I think that we're going to get invited, whether we get a seat or not, when we ask the questions that nobody else asks. And when we let go of that urge we have to always control the message and begin to trust the person we're speaking with.
I think this is a really valid point.
I would like to bring up, I think it's a little elephant in the room, which is speaking truth to power. And it's something I've had difficulty mastering, and that's why I said in my intro, I'm a strategic advisor in training. I think we learn this over time. It's not, we don't go through an overnight session and become amazing strategic advisors. But we do over time, I believe, if we are very, as Jim said, have the mindset of a business leader and understand what the need is in the company and advise on that basis and speak up, to be bold about it, to give up this idea that we have to be kind of meekly sitting in the back of the room taking notes with a camera around our neck. We have to get away from that and really step up to our role.
Well, I don't really, the truth to power thing is a wonderful talking point. But the reality, it seems to me, is that, it goes back to this notion that if you got to start talking truth to power, what I've learned over the years is you're not going to change these people. I talk about, this is what I call the loyalty exception. If we're talking about doing something immoral, illegal, unethical, or monumentally stupid, you're not going to change their minds. They're grown-ups, they're adults, they do this intentionally. All these things we see going on in business that fit those categories, these are conscious decisions by smart people. You're not going to change them. You can give it a shot, but I know a lot of senior people who hung around way too long because they thought they could change somebody's approach to something by quote unquote speaking truth to power. They're doing things that are really bad, time to find another bus to be on. It's not worth your time to keep pushing this.
But we can help leaders discover their own truth and stand in their own truth. We can, through the questions we ask and the mirror we help them hold up to themselves, help them work within the truth of the situation and the relationships. And I think that's a key part of what we bring, but we have to let go of some things in order to bring that.
Well, I think, I have like a 2-week rule. It sounds really silly, but this is a question I get asked all the time. Jim, I like this guy. I think he's basically honorable. There are things he should be doing that I've been suggesting for some time, but he refuses to do. How do you get them to change their ways or decision processes? And I said, look, these are smart people. They're grown-ups. If they're not going to do what you're talking about, and it matters, in say 10 days, then drop it. Unless it's immorally, monumentally stupid, et cetera, and pick up something else. The one thing we're really good at better than anybody else is new ideas for doing things. Pick up a new idea and push it from a different angle. But the idea that there's something we think of, that we who do not operate the company, we are staff people, can come up with a silver bullet, they're pretty rare. So we got to try different bullets, it seems to me. And this is also in line with Jim's point about asking crucial questions. I think this is a technique that really does matter. Ask management-related questions. Yeah. That's rather than keep blurting out different things to do.
Yeah,
I want to get to some questions, and we also, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, have some input from other fellows that I'd like to bounce off you guys. The first question we've got, though, and a reminder to everybody, submit your questions through Twitter to the hashtag COF23, Circle of Fellows, COF23. This is Jackie Ost, at least that's her Twitter handle. Do you think there's a difference between men and women wanting that seat at the table? I know we've already addressed the whole issue of the seat at the table, but do you think there's a gender difference in the desire to be accepted and listened to at the senior most levels of the organization?
I think there's certainly a style difference. And I talk about this a lot, public relations, is 87% female. They use a different style, a different approach that women tend to use. And I work with many women, as I presume most of you do. And they have issues that men don't have. We work on storytelling a lot because this is a male culture thing more than a female culture thing. This is where I always get into trouble. I'm going to get all kinds of bad mail, but let me just stick my foot deeper into it. So I really talk with women about essentially how they approach their own style and building their verbal skills, because basically what we're talking about is not something you write a memo about or that you even do a white paper on. Something that the kind of advice we're talking about is transmitted verbally. So I have a little course I give called Becoming a Verbal Visionary, which I'm happy to send anybody to look at, which deals with how you do some self-analysis about how you get decisions made and how you have an impact on your bosses, most of whom are likely to be male. There is a difference in style for sure.
John? Mark?
Yeah, I would agree that I think the challenge is even greater for the female to assert themselves, and that's just, I think it goes back through history, but I see that changing very quickly, and all of the female communication professionals I know can certainly hold their own in any boardroom. So
yeah, I guess I don't necessarily see it. Perhaps there are different challenges, but there are also different strengths. And when I look at the ability to ask smart questions and the ability to convey smart, probing prompts to help a leader think, I think many times women are better at it than men because they listen better than men. Listening isn't necessarily the strength of the man, and I think that many times women are far better at listening underneath what someone may be responding.
My wife would agree with you there, Mark.
Mine too.
Yeah, let me throw out an observation from Marianne Macaulay, one of our fellows.
Hello,
Who says
Marianne.
one of the keys to being a strategic advisor is to ask, what do you want to have happen? When you're, and this goes back, I think, we've all been in this business for a long, long time. And it used to be that you'd get a call. It could be from a leader. It could be from a business unit or a department, but they'd call the internal communication or external communication department and say, I need a brochure. And they don't need a brochure. They don't know what they need. They need some kind of an outcome. And they don't, they really haven't defined what that is. So that's one of the points that Marianne's making.
I'd agree. I think the key word that we need to learn is how to ask why.
Mhm.
If someone says, I need a this or a that, why? What is it that needs to accomplish? What is the reaction? What is the action that needs to emerge? It's interesting, Marianne's comment. When we coach people, the first question we ask is, what is it we need to talk about today? We don't walk in or can't walk in or shouldn't walk in with the agenda. It's our using the strengths and the skills and expertise we have to help them discover what the need actually is. Good point, Marianne.
Yep. And Jim has Jim's talking, but we're not hearing him. Jim, you're going to want to hover over the top of the screen and check the microphone that you're using. In the meantime, another observation that was, and thanks to Anna for throwing this out there, but Sherry Rosen says being a strategic advisor means knowing more than communication strategy. You have to know the company, finances, and industry. In her case, she says knowing the business means knowing how the executive team handles strategy, which happens to be agile, lean, values-based, Blanchard change management systems thinking, etc. And, to that point, I imagine that a lot of executives chuckle at communicators when the communicators walk out of the room after the communicator tells them that the ROI of something they have done is increased awareness, because that's not what return on investment is. And yet a lot of communicators don't know the financial jargon.
Mhm.
I think we're very weak in that score. There's no question about that. But I just go back to, there's other expertise you can develop and generate that is equally relevant to what the boss is interested in or needs to know about. It's interesting. I mean, my view is a little different in the sense that I'm pretty much always working at the top, but I don't really know how a lot of these people think. I don't have contact with many of the people she's talking about, in the sense that you really learn something about how they make decisions. It's interesting. My good friend from New York, Fred Garcia, fancies himself, talks about himself, and I like this a lot, as more a management anthropologist, really, than a than a communicator. And this is why I go back to studying management. I think the point is well taken. We have to study who these people are, how they think, how they make decisions. And when we ask questions, they have to be, really productive questions. But again, I go back to, if you're asking questions all the time, you have a problem. You have to have something you're going to suggest, and be ready to do that, essentially on a moment's notice, for sure.
I wanted to tout the communicator skills that we all possess and really equip us to become advisors. Think about it. If you can write, you have the ability to strategize. You're curious, you're creative, you are able to make sense out of nonsense, which is a huge skill set in today's world. You have a little bit of an insight into what's coming next, and you certainly should be able to sense audience reaction, which is also key to making any decisions in an organization.
To go back to Shell's question, I think this business of being a trusted strategic advisor, in a sense, is overrated. In that, if you really are in that room, you learn very quickly that decisions are made in a sense in a rational way. Most of these senior executives believe that good ideas come from the conflict of ideas. They come from the clash of intellects and all this sort of stuff. They like to fight up there. We're witnessing in the national scene. Everything's a fight. Everything's a battle. Everybody's counting their victories. And I think for most of us in communications, we're actually peacemakers. We're not interested in fighting with anybody. We want to find a solution. So I think that your question is really interesting, Shell, because most of us are peacemakers. We don't like conflict. We really want to sort things out, as John just said, make the irrational rational. And if that's what you want to do with your career, you're going to have a hard time being a trusted strategic advisor because they expect you to dive into the fight.
And we can help facilitate that discussion. And back, John, to your collection of skills, that ability to facilitate a conversation, even as that conversation may become heated, and help the people in the room listen to each other is an essential part of the tools that we bring to that discussion, and a reason why they invite us. If we prove that we're good at helping each other listen and hear.
I think that's one of the reasons I recommend this 3 suggestion idea. The 3 suggestions I suggest people consider are: 1, doing nothing, because it is a viable, important, discussable strategy. 2, doing something, which I call the 100% solution, and then doing something more, the 125% approach. And the reason I really do this is because communicators are known for making one suggestion. We walk in the room and say, this is the answer, do this and things will be fine, trust me. And the first person that attacks you, of course, is the HR person who says, hey, Jim, there are people involved in the transaction. If there are people, you got to talk to me before you come to a meeting and suggest it in public. Well, I liken that to being shot by a 22. It's a small bullet. You know, you might bleed a little bit, but you're still standing. Okay. But then finance jumps in and says, hey, Jim, great ideas all the time. But, you know, when you're talking things that add zeros, you have to talk to me first. Well, that's a 45. I mean, that's a big hole. You're probably on the ground, you know, and you got serious problems, you know. And then the boss chimes in and says, hey, Jim, you know, I cut your budget last year by 14%. I'm going to cut it this year by probably the same amount. I have a question for you. What's the question? You know, can you do what you just proposed on a budget that's reduced by 14% and achieve all of the things you proposed in your original budget? Well, now you've been blasted to, you know, bloody smithereens on the floor. But what you find is if you can make more than one suggestion or more than one idea, that's why I like 3, you're not going to be shot down. I think we have this notion that they have to take our advice. And what I've learned is the real role for the trusted advisor is to get there early at the boss's invitation and be invited to stay whether they listen to you or not. The goal is to be in the room when the tough decisions are being made. You know, this is where you learn about what management is. This is what you learn about how they think about things. And sometimes you have an impact and sometimes you don't, but you are there from the beginning to the end. That's really the goal. That's how you learn.
And you're there if you help them think, and if they recognize your value to help them think and help them clarify. I think that's real value, whether that comes from the suggestions you make or those questions that you ask.
And I think we have Jim Schaefer now. Jim, can you say something? And
can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yes.
You can. Oh, good. I'm sorry about
that. All right. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, if I can turn up my volume here, increase volume F3. Just a second. There. How about that? Now
while you're doing that, I'll pass along Tamara Gillis's contribution to the conversation. And she says, strategic advisor is a role we earn through trust, and trust is earned through our actions over time. Trust is a two-way contract in relationships, especially when advising organizational leadership.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think the trust observation is an important one. Nobody's going to seek our counsel if they don't trust that we're going to deliver the kind of advice that's going to produce the kinds of results that matter to the leaders of the organization.
And we can't be one-hit wonders either. Trust is earned over time, obviously.
think trust turns out to be situational, and it has to do with the combination of things we've talked about here. I think especially how you participate in the discussion, or whether you participate. I think one of the raps on communicators is that we're the one staff function that can be counted on to hold things back. We have trouble with candor, and I think candor is the number one ingredient in that relationship between you and the senior people you advise. Is she telling me everything she knows? What does she know that she's holding back? We're just known for this. John mentioned we sit in the back of the room with a camera around our neck. I mean, if you're going to be a trusted advisor, you sit in the front row and you raise your hand a few times and you take a risk, and because you have to. It's how the game is. It's really how the game is played. And sometimes you can't make peace. Sometimes you have to really engage in the struggle. I think the concept of asking questions is a helpful way to do that. But the number one thing people look for from us is candor. What's going on? What do you know that I should know? Because the one thing bosses do know is when you get up at that altitude, you become increasingly isolated. People protect. We're actually the worst at this. When something bad happens, we help join hands with other staff people to isolate the boss even more. And what the boss wants is to talk to the entire world to find out what's going on. But we block that instead of facilitating it.
Jim Schaefer, great to have you on board. Can you introduce yourself briefly?
What are we talking about today? No, I have been so frustrated with the technology. I want to just sit here and breathe for a minute.
Go ahead. Bring your blood pressure back down to something healthy and safe.
There you go. But I really enjoy what I'm hearing about, particularly about trust, because I think that is one of the most important pieces of being a strategic advisor is to, if people trust you, they will listen to you, they'll pay attention to you, they'll forgive you when you make mistakes, perhaps, or when maybe you don't deliver what they expected. So after a period of time, building that kind of relationship can be very, very powerful for the organization, but the advice needs to come in certain ways about certain ways. And I think what it's going to mean as communication people become more so-called trusted advisors or strategic advisors, it's going to be important for them to look at different things, measure different things, have different outcomes. I completely agree that let me tell a couple of stories here. One story here from the World Conference. I had 3 presentations there, and in every conversation, the communication people were first starting with conversations about the activities, the formal channels. And what I was saying is, no, you start with the result you want. Then you back into that and identify what the root cause of that is, and then what are the solutions that will remove the root cause. And I think that one of the biggest barriers for communication people is that shift of thinking from, well, what do we inflict on people, like another newsletter or another whatever? Instead, what is the real problem? What is the cause of that problem? Does it make sense to go after that problem from a cost standpoint because the return is going to be greater than the cost, et cetera, et cetera? That's a whole line of thinking that a whole lot of people in Washington, D.C. in June were not comfortable with.
And how do we reach beyond our channels and our tools to really get to know the person we're trying to advise? How does this person think? How does this person make decisions? What does this person fear? What does this person want? What disappoints? What excites? I think sometimes we get so locked into thinking that there is a communication solution to a situation that we don't spend enough time getting to know the person and what solutions that person can bring that may have nothing to do with those formal things that we can create. And that's where we have to let go of some things. And I think that need to always control the experience may be at the top of that list.
I think, I really studied over the years, not studied leaders, but I've also studied the people that give them advice. And I sort of tried to catalog what is it based on what I witnessed. What is it that the people we're advising actually are looking for? And there's 7 things, but the top 3 are, I talked about the first one, is to be candid. They want to feel that you're being disclosive with them with information. The second thing is to help the boss with what to do next. The problem with isolation of bosses is there's nobody to guide them in what the next steps ought to be. That seems to me to be very fertile territory for people like us. But third is interesting, provide advice on the spot. You know, the most frustrating thing for leaders is they talk to their staff people, they ask good questions, then they leave the room and they go somewhere. And you know, it's 10 o'clock in the morning, the place is burning down, and then at 1:30 they call because they have some ideas. And so the boss says, okay, fine, come on up. And, you know, all of a sudden we go from 1:30 back to 10 o'clock, you know, when we've already been practicing management and making decisions all along. Management is a real-time activity, and it's very frustrating when we ask questions and then leave the room. You know, one of the differences between an outside consultant and an inside advisor is, you know, people like us are paid to give advice on the spot, to take the risk, say something, maybe fired. You know, I believe that I'm fired the moment I'm hired, actually. But the issue really is to act now, say, talk now, change now, select now. This is what the kind of help they need, and the people are good at that. Are, you know, that's one of the reasons lawyers actually have so much power in these situations. They're used to giving advice on the spot, right or wrong, and they're used to discussing their advice on the spot because it contributes to what's going forward. This is a habit I teach, coach. You know, you have to this is a habit people have to generate in themselves and learn. This is what keeps you in the room. This is what gets you in the room, is offering tangible, helpful, sensible, you know, doable ideas or concepts on the spot. Take a risk.
Jim, I agree with you, and I think one of the questions that Mark asked just a little bit ago connects with that. I recall, Mark, at Towers Perrin, we were introduced by Crosby Deaton to Dr. Stuart Atkins' 4 styles, and the senior consultants learned those 4 styles, and I have incorporated them in the IBC Academy course that I developed on how to become a strategic advisor. And one of the things that I teach in our workshops is the importance of observing, of listening, of watching. And I remember when we were taught this, Chuck Johnston, who was a strategy consultant for Towers Perrin, and I were sitting in a meeting, and we started looking around the room before the principal came into the meeting. And we looked around and we could see what was on the shelves, and we could see what the desk looked like, whether it was orderly or whatever. We immediately arrived at a style and then understood that this person was a very fast-paced person, or this person needed a lot of analytical data behind it, and that sort of thing. I do that workshop not only for IABC, but I do the workshop on my own with people, and I will play the role of the CEO. And the people I will have somebody who's got a problem, and they're bringing it, and they're the consultant, the strategic advisor, and I shift styles on them. They don't know that I'm doing it, but I'll move from a conserving holding to a controlling taking to a supporting giving, et cetera, et cetera. I think that kind of observation and learning where people are coming from is a big part of what I was hearing Jim say as well. Absolutely. Is deliver, but deliver it in a way that I can hear it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like that. I developed over the years a kind of a checklist for trusted advisors. How do you know you're a trusted advisor? Okay, these are my 6 or 7 tests. 1, people quote you when you're not in the room. Okay.
Yes.
2, people quote you when you are in the room. You know, as Jim just said, so to speak. People tell your stories and give you credit for them. That's the 3rd thing. People tell your stories and take credit themselves. That's the 4th thing. You know, the concept of other people seeking your opinion and your ideas to work to actually to influence others higher than both of you. It's very interesting. If you achieve this status, others recognize your influence and that sort of thing. The boss asks others to check with you before checking with him or her. That's a tough one, an important one. But my favorite is, you know, they hold up meetings until you arrive. Okay.
I also see from time to time that they will have enough confidence in you that they start bringing their personal problems to you too, family problems, neighbor
Absolutely.
problems, and asking similar kinds of questions that they would ask in a business environment.
Problems raises an issue that John Hammond tweeted to us. He's from the UK, and he notes, isn't it really about understanding and then being able to address their pain?
Yeah,
and help,
sure.
Definitely.
and help them discover their pain, and help them define the pain, and help them project what the impact of the pain is, and begin to help them find their path through the pain. That we become essential, and they become better at what they do, and they like the fact that we help them along that journey.
I go
I think
back
it's
to
very-
our
very
skill
interesting.
set of, excuse me, Jim. I go back to the skill set of being able to tell stories and offer feedback. And we are out and about, or we should be connecting with folks. And we should have some stories that we can share when we're in a meeting with our CEO or whomever, and something that will trigger something that will put something on their radar that they hadn't thought of before.
I had the experience once of gaining leadership's trust by proving them wrong. Once I was able to show them that my original advice would have been worth heeding, the next time a similar issue came around, they asked. This was an organization that was about to open a $2.5 million cafeteria with a waterfall to baffle the noise of the freeway on the outside patio. And it turned out the ribbon cutting was 2 days after a layoff, 10% of the headquarters staff.
Right.
And I said, you're going to have people who are going to be mightily upset that we have opened a $2.5 million cafeteria, and the people they have worked with are looking for work and wondering how they're going to feed their kids. We should explain the difference between a capital and an overhead expense proactively, so people will understand before this happens that opening the cafeteria wouldn't have saved jobs. And they said, you're just trying to create a fire where there isn't one. And of course, they opened the cafeteria right after the layoff, and the complaints were voluminous. And they said, well, maybe we want to do that explanation now. And I said, there's a difference between proactive and reactive. And after that, they came to me with these decisions.
And it's helping them see that impact. Shell, my favorite example also involves water. So maybe there's a water thing going through here, but it's a hospital that planned to build a big fountain that was going to look like the fountain at Caesar's Palace in front of a hospital. And it was just helping them imagine the reaction of someone coming to the hospital front doors for the reasons that people go to the hospital, and being greeted by this thing that looked as though Cher was going to walk out at any moment, and how inappropriate that might be. Well, I could have told them it was inappropriate, but it was more powerful in the moment to help them discover how wrong this was for the experience they were trying to create. And by helping them discover that conclusion, it stuck more so than I think if I had simply told them it wasn't going to work.
And Priya Bates makes the point in her contribution. She said, our superpower is communication. Our greatest opportunity is to use it to influence and impact organizational results, turning words into actions, stories, engagement, trust, and loyalty. But when we get to this idea of a strategic advisor, and I don't want to assume that we all share the same definition of that. I'm assuming that has something to do with that our advice produces meaningful results, meaningful to the leaders of the organization or whoever in the organization has sought our counsel. But doesn't that go beyond the leadership? Can't we provide strategic counsel elsewhere in the organization in order to affect better? And when I talk about communication here, I'm not talking about producing collateral or delivering messages, but actually helping people in departments and teams in the organization communicate more effectively with each other.
Yeah, I think there are three different areas of strategy. I've read a lot of Michael Porter, Competitive Advantage, et cetera, and talk a lot about business strategy, but I think there are three. One is strategy formulation, and that is creating the strategy. Are we going to go into China with these 2 new products, or are we going to go someplace else? Strategy clarification is the second one. And I think that is where a lot of communication practitioners can play, and that is clarifying that business strategy, linking people to the strategy, providing open book management kinds of concepts that connect people on the factory floor with the extent to which they can improve on-time delivery and that sort of thing. And then there's strategy execution, which I think has a lot to do with what communication people might be able to do. Some will and some won't want to, but that is managing the systems and the processes to create alignment in the organization. How many times have somebody come up and say the problem that we have is, and they name, we don't have a brochure or whatever, whereas the root cause of the problem of the productivity or the quality problem is actually you've got an incentive plan that's telling people to hurry, do it fast, and you're creating damage. So I think that a lot of communication people have opportunities to play in the strategy clarification area and the strategy execution area. Strategy formulation is an art and a science to itself that may be quite distant from what communication people would be comfortable with.
And there's a fourth one, Jim, and it comes from my overflowing file of wisdom from Jim Schaefer that I've been collecting for about 30 some years. And that is what I would call strategic reality. And one of the things you taught me a long time ago is that a strategy is only as real as it's felt by the last person on the line. And it's back to, John, you're talking about those fundamental skills and our ability to walk into a room and project. Here is how real people will react to whatever you're suggesting. And that ability to have that ear to the ground and be connected to how real people think is going to get us that invitation over and over again.
Absolutely.
I'd like to take this. We've been sort of focused on the enterprise, but I think the whole idea of being a strategic advisor applies equally to external communication. And Jim Lukashevsky, I know you do crisis work. And during a crisis, in my experience, is when leaders sort of jerk their knees and retreat and don't pay a lot of attention, particularly to advice that seems counterintuitive to their very defensive reaction to what's going on.
I think mine is the easiest part of the business. I think the hardest part of public relations is trying to figure out what to do with all of these. How do I you just saw Mark take a drink? How do you promote that pop can? Well, I don't know how to do that, but if there's something in there that's not good, I know what to do with that. And so, my job is easy. I learned early. I don't know who taught me this, but it's more and more relevant as I get older. People keep asking me, Jim, I suppose that all of us really, because of what we look like, what new bad things are happening on the planet that we should be concerned about? And my response always is, there is nothing new. Unless I missed a press release on the 11th commandment, they're still busting the same 10 the same way every day. And what I learned really was that essentially all these problems that organizations have, most of which are caused by intentional nutty decisions, that's another story, but are, follow the same patterns. So one of the things that makes a crisis consultant really valuable is understanding the pattern of events in these adverse situations, and they be able to essentially make forecasts based on the patterns we recognize. When I first learned that lesson, I began developing war story files. I began collecting things, stories in the paper, that was before the web, but stuff that I thought would affect clients of mine going forward, so that when they called me, I had something on the problem in my file. And what I learned was all of these things, really follow very similar pathways, whatever the problem happens to be. And so I tend to talk about essentially where things are headed, because it tends to help them get focused on a couple of key ideas. One, bad news always ripens badly. You're going to spend. I sort of estimate Lukashevsky math, but I estimate that you spend about 50% of your energy and 25% of your resources every day fixing yesterday's bad decisions as you're responding And frankly, speed beats smart every time. Make decisions, take action today, those sorts of things. And it really works in every single case, regardless of the issue. But the lesson here is that in my business, a sexual harassment circumstance is pretty similar, organization to organization, even culture to culture. Embezzlement, the things that go on in a corporation that are unethical, unnecessary, monumentally goofy, are very similar from organization to organization. And when I start talking about things happening, once in a while, someone will say, "Who have you been talking to?" I haven't talked to anybody. I'm just talking to you. But you get what I call the Yoda complex. In fact, the guy sent me a lamp recently. There's a Yoda lamp. It's on my desk right here. Because I warn people, I make forecasts about what's going to happen, and I'm going to be wrong at least half the time. But here's the scary part. I'm going to be right half the time. And it's a very powerful position to be in, because everybody's waiting for the right thing to be mentioned. So, in crisis work, it's everybody is in a tizzy, and it's highly irrational for a lot of people, but ultimately it's easier than so many things that we do in public relations, interestingly enough.
Yeah, one of the interesting things in a crisis is we talked earlier about the fact that leaders tend to listen to lawyers. The lawyers always have advice on the spot, and in a crisis, the advice is shut up. Don't say anything. And without having built the trust and the credibility to say no, that's not the right approach, that's what they're going to do. And Jim, you mentioned Fred Garcia earlier. He's the first one to tell you that not saying anything is going to lead to some pretty serious consequences.
I refer to that as a toxic strategy. Right. Silence is a toxic strategy to the reputation, to the employment of the people running the place. But in reality, this business of understanding these bad things as patterns is very, very helpful way to approach these things, because it always leads to the kinds of stories that help the folks who are in charge, sort things out and get on a decent pathway. It also says essentially that if you don't do the things that have demonstrated resolution, then you're essentially condemning yourself to a continuation of the problems until you do. I'm almost never the first one hired anyway, right, in these situations, because I'm interested in solving the problem, and I'll email you 9 steps to get this problem resolved. You can do all of them starting today, and people will say, Jim, 9 things on a sheet of paper, and we got a crisis going on here. What if we did 3, 5, and 7 to start with and see what happens? Then they call back 9 months later, 10 months later, and say, you probably don't remember me. You said, you're the 3, 5, 7 guys, right? You remember this? It's what I do every day. But in essence, the point is, then they ask, would you hire someone who didn't hire you first? Well, yes. And then we kind of go from there. But the question is, what are you doing on the 1 through 9? You still have to do those things starting today to get this thing resolved.
Well, I would love to keep this conversation going, but we are at the top of the hour. I want to let everyone know, first of all, that I have more of these observations that were sent in by other members of our fellows group. I will publish all of these on the show notes, which will probably go up tomorrow. Usually they go up right away, but as soon as this ends, I'm blasting out, hoping to make a flight that boards at 12:30, about 2.5 hours from now. I also want to remind everybody that next month on August 17th, we have Priya Bates, Mary Hills, George McGrath, and Cindy Schmieg joining the Circle of Fellows to talk about how to foster a socially responsible organization, a topic that is certainly top of mind with me these days. And also, as always, want to thank Anna Willey for her work in making sure the panels get assembled, and then being on hand to help as the various technical challenges unfold. We really appreciate Anna's work. And with that, we'll just say goodbye until the next Circle of Fellows. Thanks, everybody. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks, y'all.
Everybody.
Safe travels.
Thanks.